So I watched West Side Story for the very first time this past weekend ahead of my screening for the 2021 version, and you know what? That Tonight song, it's kind of stuck in my head. You know that tonight, no. Oh, no, I'm gonna stop. Okay, sorry. What's going on, everyone? James here with another real review, and today I'm diving into Steven Spielberg's West Side Story, an adaptation of the classic musical. And no, it's not really a remake of the film in 1961, but there are some clear differences here, some for better and some for worse, but we will dive into that. But before that, a huge thank you to 20th Century Studios for giving me the chance to watch this in person. I believe it was a Dolby theater, which was it's necessary for this film. It hits theaters December 10th and is directed again by Steven Spielberg and starring Rachel Zegler, Ariana DeBose, Ansel Elgort, and David Alvarez. So you've probably already seen this movie thousands of times, but if you're unfamiliar with the plot, let's break it down a little bit here. So again, this is an adaptation of the classic 1957 musical West Side Story, which surrounds two rival gangs in New York City, the Jets and Sharks, who are quite literally ready to rumble. But we get taken on a romantic journey between Maria and Tony, two lovers on the opposite sides of the playing field who have different backgrounds and ties to both of the gangs. Now we're going to dive into some of the chatter around this movie, my thoughts, what worked and what didn't. But before we get there, if it is your first time here at the channel, welcome to Real James, where I love talking about movies and TV like this all the time. So if you do too, go ahead and hit the big red button below, subscribe to the channel, tap on that bell, and hit the thumbs up button if you are a fan of West Side Story and this insane cast. And get loud down below and let me know which song from this musical is your favorite. For me, I'm going America. Alrighty y'all, so let's get started with my review and clear the air about some of the stuff surrounding this movie. Ansel Elgort, of course, has been involved in some controversy leading up to this film over the past year and a half. He's been involved in some things. You're probably going to want to read about it on your own time if you haven't already, but you couple that with the fact that the lead character of Maria is Puerto Rican, but she is played by someone who's not. So we'll talk about that, whether it adds to the movie, takes away from the movie. So let's get into first what works in this film. And that's the fact that Steven Spielberg directs the heck out of this movie. I mean, nobody makes films like he does today. Steven Spielberg is one of my favorite directors of all time, and I knew that him in the director's chair for this movie might give it that edge over the original. Now, I don't want to compare the two too much, but what I will tell you is that he's able to extract the human element in this story more so than the 1961 film. There's a level of realism added to the story in between the musical numbers that made me appreciate the characters themselves that much more. And I do love the fact that he added a level of depth to our more famous characters. And yes, that includes Bernardo, Riff, and even Tony. I love the fact that Steven Spielberg was able to basically make me empathize with these characters much more. Of course, they talked about Bernardo being a boxer, which was, I think, different from the original film, and then Tony going to prison. So there are certain things, certain elements in this movie that just are added to the story that work for me. And I also thought the creative differences between this film and the 1961 adaptation were both a blessing and a curse, but let's start with the positives. The placement of certain numbers worked much better for me here than in the original film. So Cool, for example, is a number that I did not care about in the 1961 movie. It came after the Rumble, and it would just, for me, it detracted from the actual film. But I feel like in Steven Spielberg's movie, Cool, it actually places us in the frame of mind of Tony and Riff, because this is their duet together. It was excellent. And I also love the fact that America was even more visually appealing and, dare I say, more breathtaking than the original film's version. However, both performances by Rita in the original and Ariana DeBose here in Steven Spielberg's movie are incredible. Okay, they're legendary, but I just think that it was much better in this new film. Now, that's a preference, but still, it was excellent. And I also love the fact that Steven Spielberg and writer Tony Kushner decided to include so much Spanish in this script. Whenever we're with Bernardo and we're with Anita, Maria, and any of the sharks, there's so much Spanish being spoken and no subtitles on screen. For me, that helps me become more immersed in the movie, because I know I probably should know more Spanish at this point living in South Florida, but I will tell you that this film definitely takes a different approach, because most movies would give subtitles, and I love the fact that they didn't. To me, it just added to a level of authenticity that the original failed to capture. And some of these characters we're familiar with do get a change in appearance and personality, like Chino, who's a very important character, but he's a nerd here. And I mean that in a good way. Nerds are cool, okay? I'm a nerd. We're all nerds, okay? But I do think that Chino here is a little less suave at first, so I think that it was definitely a cool approach because it allowed us to understand the evolution of his character. And honestly guys, this take on West Side Story felt more like a film than a movie musical. And what I mean by that is the way it's shot, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and the way everything is framed makes this feel more like a feature-length film rather than a movie musical. So I went in and I actually expected a number right off the bat, and the very first song that we get, it's not a number but a song, is from the Sharks, but it's within conversation almost. So I love the fact that we're getting a little bit more of that film, that cinematic approach, rather than it just being a movie musical. And that's a testament definitely to Steven Spielberg's talent in that director's chair. And guys, this is actually just one of the more stunning films of the year. Janusz Kaminski, who was already an Academy Award winning cinematographer, brought his talents again to West Side Story, and let me tell you, he's excellent. There are a lot of moments that left my jaw on the ground in terms of how everything looked and was framed, but one in particular was when Tony's walking down a dark alley, steps on a puddle, and then like the ripple effects sort of just like take over the background of the screen, and it's just so beautiful to see the lights and the colors and how everything is blending together. So I think that both Spielberg and Janusz were able to work together perfectly in this movie. And I even love the way the musical numbers were filmed, with long sweeping shots, tracking shots down the street, and even in the more intimate moments when we get extreme close-ups of our characters, it all just worked very well for me. And the movie even felt a little bit vintage too. There's this like retro vibe to it because of the way I think it is filmed. So I wouldn't be surprised honestly if others feel the same way, but man, this movie really just captures a lot of what we loved in the old movie while giving it a little bit of a modern, fresh spin for today's age. Now, outside of the technical achievements in West Side Story, there are some stunning performances. And that starts with whom I felt gave the best performance in the entire movie, Ariana DeBose as Anita. This was always going to be a tall task, honestly, because the legendary Rita Moreno gave a perfect performance as Anita in the 1961 film. But Ariana DeBose puts her own stamp on this, and I'm telling you, there's a moment, and it really is closer to the beginning of the movie, where she goes and, I guess, takes part in a musical number. She's dancing, singing, and acting, and let me tell you guys, it was a breath of fresh air, because everything up to that point was a little rocky for me, and I was thinking, okay, maybe the music isn't going to be as strong, but when she belts out those tunes, she is incredible, and she deserves all of her flowers for this performance. I also really enjoyed Mike Faist as Riff, because in the original film, I didn't particularly love the performance. However, here, Mike Faist actually made me care about this character of Riff. He lacks a father figure, doesn't have a lot of direction in his life, and looks to Tony as pretty much his only brother, which is so beautiful. And I love the fact that this movie really kind of hones in on this character and gives us a moment where he's going to buy a gun. I'm sure you know what comes after that, but man, does that moment feel even more personal and definitely a lot more, I would say, emotional. And of course, a lot of people are going to talk about Rita Moreno returning as Valentina, and she runs Docs, but let me tell you guys, on her own, she did a wonderful job. I don't want to say too much more about her character to reserve some of the surprise for that backstory, because there is something they reveal about midway through the film into the third act where I thought, oh, really? That is cool. But I do love the fact that Rita Moreno was back. She performed a very heartbreaking number at the end of the movie. It was short, but man, did it kind of leave a little ping in my heart. And then there were three, you guys. You have Tony, Maria, and Bernardo. So let's start with Bernardo. He's played by David Alvarez, and I'm not gonna lie to you guys, at the beginning it was a little bit rough for me. I didn't really feel like he was fitting into this role, and even his accent was a little bit tough for me to really get on board with, but as the movie went on, I think it did get much better in terms of his performance, and I really love the dancing. I mean, David Alvarez is a great dancer, so all the moments between him and Ariana DeBose were perfect to me, and they actually have the best on-screen chemistry in the entire film. And of course, a lot of people are going to talk about Tony, who is played again by Ansel Elgort, and he did a great job singing. I'm not going to lie to you guys. His numbers really worked for me. At first, I think his acting was being a little bit overshadowed by his co-stars. I think he is a solid actor. He's not great, but he is very solid in every movie I've seen him in. Here, I think he does a really good job. However, he is a little bit more reserved than his co-stars, and maybe that's the character, maybe that's the direction, or maybe that's just Ansel Elgort. But I will tell you that he did a pretty good job in this role. However, I do think that him alongside Maria, we'll talk about that later. So you know what, let's just transition into what I thought about Rachel Zegler as Maria. There's going to be a lot of buzz around this 20-year-old, you guys, but when it comes to her singing, I thought she did a really good job at nailing her moments. My gosh, she was hitting those high notes, and there were some times where I thought, can we just have Rachel sing here? Because Ansel and Rachel, like, separately, they're pretty good, but together, it almost feels like Rachel Zegler's voice was just overpowering Ansel Elgort here. However, there's another side of the coin, which is her acting, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, but just based on her singing and her performances within the musical numbers, I thought she did a pretty solid job. Alrighty, so we talked about the technical aspects, we talked about the characters, the story, and some of those differences from the original film, but let's now talk about what I didn't think worked very well with West Side Story. And coming into this adaptation, I was hoping for an improvement with Maria and Tony's storyline, because guys, I did not care for it in the 1961 movie. It didn't sway me once, it made me scratch my head, and I actually thought it was very unbelievable. However, in this film, it's much more unbelievable and unrealistic. And that's due in large part because of Steven Spielberg's focus on the human element. Remember earlier I said it was great, right? It's a blessing and a curse. And the other side of that is because he is extracting that human side of our characters and he's able to give a very natural feel to the film, it allows for moments like this, which are unnatural to me, to be magnified, and it just sticks out like a sore thumb. I honestly can't wrap my head around Maria falling into Tony's arms the night he murders her brother, and then they both take it a step further in this movie, and that made me check out of their relationship completely. And I also really don't think that Ansel Elgort and Rachel Zegler have good chemistry on screen. I feel like one is always trying to kind of overact compared to the other, or one is trying to sing louder than the other. Rachel Zegler, great voice in this movie. I just don't necessarily think her voice kind of syncs up very well with Tony in this film. I think both of them separately are good. Both of them together, it can get a little distracting because you're trying to figure out where they're going to eventually come together, and they never really do. I mean, again, when you look at David Alvarez and Ariana DeBose, both of them have chemistry that's unmatched. It's vibrant, natural, and real, but Maria and Tony here feel much more forced than they did in the original movie, so it only took me out of the experience in the second half. And sadly, I felt the third act was a little bit less than impactful, and I'd say anticlimactic. Everything after the rumble and that tragic aftermath was supposed to feel pretty darn gut-wrenching, but Steven Spielberg decided to switch around the order of I Feel Pretty and place it after the fight. So tonally, I think it was all over the place, and I went from being very locked into a sad, emotional moment to I Feel Pretty, which never really worked for me. And if anything, and if I'm not mistaken, I Feel Pretty comes before the rumble, and that to me makes much more sense. So that was one of just a few misfires, I think, and when it comes to anybody's, I think that they missed the mark here too. Iris Menace's performance is not bad, don't get me wrong, but they don't give her enough screen time to really warrant this very emotional moment between her and the Jets at the end of the film. And even then, I didn't feel like they really hit a home run like they did in the original film. I also will tell you that not every performance worked. I mean, you have Corey Stoll and Brian Darcy James, who are great actors, but in this adaptation, they sort of just exist. Whenever they showed up on screen, I mean, I cared a little bit in the beginning, but after that, they didn't really do anything for me. They were just there to kind of push the story along a little bit, so it's sad because I just thought that they would maybe provide a little bit more impact, but at least the G Officer Krupke number was pretty fun. And guys, I'm gonna preface this next point with this. Please don't get mad at me, but I did think that Rachel Zegler's singing was pretty darn good. I just didn't buy her performance as Maria. And that's due in large part to the concern I had before this screening, which was, can a non-Puerto Rican actress really capture the essence of this very important character of Maria? And I don't think that she did a very good job here. If anything, she was trying to be a Puerto Rican woman in New York City instead of being a Puerto Rican woman in New York City. So it did feel like almost she was overacting a little bit to make up for any sort of deficiencies. I just didn't really think that her performance came across as authentic and natural as a lot of the other performances in this movie. That's not to say she's awful, but again, I just could not ever really buy her as Maria here. So I guess that is a negative in and of itself, which is the authenticity of this film. While they kind of succeeded by keeping a lot of that Spanish dialogue in the movie throughout, I think that some of the casting decisions here kind of took me out of the immersion that the film probably should have provided from start to finish. But overall, you guys, West Side Story is a pretty darn good movie. Steven Spielberg delivers again. I mean, this man hardly misses, and I mean, this is one of his best films in a very long time. I do think that this maybe is his most cinematic movie in terms of just how it feels since Lincoln. He's done an incredible job with this adaptation, and I love some of the creative differences and choices that he chose to include here in this film. The majority of the musical numbers worked for me. I love the dancing and the choreography, and yes, there were some incredible performances that starts right with Ariana DeBose. I can't tell you guys enough how amazing she is in this movie, and I hope she's up for some awards this season. However, I will tell you that on the flip side, some of the negatives here hold it back from being a great film. Again, you have the authenticity factor. You have some of the performances here that just don't feel as natural as everyone else's, and I won't lie to you, there's some issues with that third act where, again, it just never hits home for me. But if you're a fan of the musical, if you're a fan of the 1961 adaptation, I think that this is well worth a watch for you, especially in theaters, where not only are you getting the biggest sound, but seeing how beautiful this movie looks on the big screen is well worth your money. So yeah, if I had to rate it, you guys, I'd probably give it like a 4 out of 5 stars. It's a solid film. It is very well directed and shot. I just wish that everything came together in that second half for me to really say I loved West Side Story. So there you have it, you guys. That's my real review of West Side Story. Again, it's in theaters December 10th, and when you see it, go ahead and get loud down below in the comments and let me know what you think of this film. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? Which performance was your favorite? And guys, can we please talk about how catchy some of these songs are? I mean, my goodness, I was humming them after I left the theater. And if you haven't already, go ahead and hit the big red button below, subscribe to the channel, and tap on that bell, y'all. And I promise you, the rest of this month, and actually in December, we're going to probably be pushing out a lot of content, so you can expect this beautiful face in front of your TV screen or on your TV screen. Yeah, either one works. Alrighty, you guys, again, thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you at the next screening.